200-ton blocks moved with millimetric precision, stone cuts that require industrial technology, flood marks in the driest desert on the planet. Around the world, there exist archaeological sites that contradict everything we have been taught about ancient civilizations. Official science insists they were built with stone hammers and brute force. But the numbers don't lie. The tolerances are impossible. The transportation methods defy physics. And the more modern technology we use to study them, the less sense the traditional explanations make. 7 mysteries, 4 continents. An uncomfortable truth. There is physical evidence carved in stone that proves we know nothing about our past. Chapter 1. The Valley Temple, Survivor of the Flood. Marks of water running down ancient stone, in the middle of Egypt's driest desert. This shouldn't exist, but there they are, carved into the walls of a structure that most tourists completely ignore while taking selfies with the pyramids in the background. The Valley Temple is located right at the feet of the Great Sphinx in Giza. It's a square construction, without ornaments, that looks more like a military fortress than a religious temple. Most people walk right past it. And the truth is, it's not exactly photogenic compared to its famous neighbors. But the numbers behind this silent structure tell a story that challenges everything we know about ancient Egypt. We're talking about limestone and granite blocks that weigh up to 200 tons each. To give you an idea, that's exactly the weight of a fully loaded Boeing 747. Imagine moving a commercial airplane without cranes, without wheels, without anything more than human strength and basic tools. But here comes the really crazy part. These stones weren't just moved. They were transported from quarries located hundreds of kilometers away. The red granite you see in some sections of the temple comes from the quarries of Aswan, more than 900 kilometers upstream along the Nile. The limestone blocks, although closer, still represent a logistical challenge that would make any modern engineer sweat. And once they arrived at the site, they were placed with a precision that borders on perfection. There's no mortar between the stones. None. The blocks fit so perfectly that you can't even fit a sheet of paper between the joints. But here's where things get really strange. Walk around the Valley Temple and you'll notice something that doesn't fit at all with what we know about ancient Egyptian culture. There's absolutely nothing written on the walls. Not a single hieroglyph, not an image of the pharaoh, not a religious scene, not even a mason's mark. This goes against everything we know about the ancient Egyptians. These guys carved their names even on bricks. Pharaohs couldn't resist the temptation to plaster their image and achievements on every available surface. It was like their version of Instagram, but in stone and for eternity. Egyptian ego was legendary, and with good reason. They had built some of the most impressive structures in the ancient world. So why does this temple, located in the heart of Egypt's most sacred complex, not have a single identification mark? It's like finding an iPhone without the Apple logo. It simply doesn't add up. The official explanation says the Valley Temple was built during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC, as part of Pharaoh Khafre's funerary complex. Supposedly, it was the place where mummification rituals were carried out. But more and more archaeologists and geologists are beginning to question this version, and the reason is literally written on the walls. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, has been studying these structures for decades, and what he found led him to a conclusion that shook the academic world. The erosion marks on the walls of the Valley Temple weren't caused by wind and desert sand. They were caused by water. Lots of water. Water that ran down the walls for prolonged periods. But here's the problem. Egypt has been an arid desert for the last 5,000 years. There haven't been rains intense enough to create this type of erosion since the temple was supposedly built. The vertical marks on the stones tell the story of a completely different climate, a humid, rainy climate with intense and constant precipitation. Schoch proposes that these structures date from a much older period, possibly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, when North Africa was green and fertile. It was the end of the last ice age, when the entire planet was experiencing dramatic climate changes. Egypt wasn't a desert. It was a green savanna with rivers, lakes, and regular rainfall. If shock is right, then we're seeing physical evidence of a civilization that existed thousands of years before the first pharaoh, a civilization advanced enough to move 200-ton blocks and place them with millimetric precision, a civilization of which we have no written records but which left its mark in stone. And here's where the story takes a turn that connects to something much bigger. That period of 12,000 years ago coincides with a climatic event known as the Younger Dryas. It was a sudden return to glacial conditions after a period of warming. The ice melted rapidly, sea levels rose dramatically, and the global climate went crazy. Many modern scientists have confirmed that during this period extreme climatic events occurred. Massive floods, dramatic geographical changes, the kind of catastrophe that could have erased entire civilizations from the face of the earth. The construction of the Valley Temple doesn't seem designed to impress visitors or to house elaborate religious ceremonies. There's no decoration, no spaces for crowds, no secret chambers full of treasures. What you have is a massive structure with walls several meters thick, no roof, built as if it were designed to resist extreme natural forces. It's as if someone had built a shelter, a stone time capsule to survive what they knew was coming. Walls thick enough to resist floods. No roof so water could drain. No decoration because there was no time for luxuries, only survival. Legends of a great flood aren't exclusive to the Bible. You find them in practically all cultures of the world. The Sumerians had Utnapishtim. The Greeks had Deucalion. The Hindus had their own stories of floods that covered the entire earth. Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, African tribes all talk about the same thing, a catastrophic event that destroyed the previous world and forced humanity to start over. Until recently, academics dismissed these stories as myths. But what if they're not? What if they're cultural memories of real events, transmitted through thousands of years of oral tradition? What if the Valley Temple is the physical evidence that confirms these stories have a real basis? The structure stands there, silent but persistent, like a stone testimony of a world that no longer exists. Its walls, scarred by water, tell a story that official archaeology prefers to ignore. A story of a lost civilization that knew what was coming and built to survive. So what are we really seeing when we look at the Valley Temple? An Egyptian temple from 2500 BC? Or the last vestige of a civilization that mastered construction techniques we barely understand today? A religious building or a survival facility built by people who knew their world was about to end? The answer remains written on those walls eroded by water, waiting for us to have the courage to read what they really say. And if you think surviving a global flood sounds impossible, wait until you learn about the place where they cut stone with tolerances of thousandths of an inch using supposedly primitive bronze tools. That's where the official story really crumbles. Chapter 2. Puma Punku, the impossible precision. Tolerances of 1/10,000th of an inch. That's what they found when they measured the H-blocks of Puma Punku. To understand what this means, it's the precision we use to manufacture jet engine components. We're talking about the level of accuracy required by parts that keep an airplane in the air at 40,000 feet. The difference is that we use computer-controlled machines, measurement lasers, and diamond tools. They, supposedly, used stone hammers and bronze chisels. Puma Punku is in Bolivia, more than 3,800 meters above sea level on the Andean Plateau. It's part of the larger archaeological complex of Tiwanaku, a civilization that flourished between 500 and 600 AD. But when you get there and see the stones, something doesn't add up at all with that chronology. The first thing that hits you is the chaos. The site looks like it exploded. Massive blocks of andesite and red sandstone are scattered everywhere, as if a tremendous force had thrown them through the air. Some weigh between 50 and 100 tons, and they're scattered hundreds of meters from where they were originally located. But when you start examining the individual stones, that's where your mind goes to hell. The famous H-blocks are exactly what their name suggests, stones cut in a perfect H shape. But we're not talking about an H drawn freehand. Each of these blocks is identical to the other, down to the last millimeter. The surfaces are so flat they reflect light like mirrors. The cuts are so precise that when you put a ruler on them, there's not the slightest gap. Andesite is a super hard volcanic rock. On the Mohs scale, it has a hardness of 7 points. To give you an idea, common steel has 5.5. You're trying to cut something harder than steel using bronze tools, which barely reach 3.5 on the same scale. It's like trying to cut steel with a butter knife. But it's not just the flat surfaces that drive any engineer who visits the place crazy. It's the circular perforations, perfectly round holes with smooth walls that go several centimeters into the rock. Holes that look like they were made with modern industrial drills, and there are no chisel marks, no rough edges, no evidence that someone had been there chipping away at the stone for weeks or months. The blocks also have internal grooves, channels that run through the interior of the stone with perfectly square corners. These grooves are cut at exact 90-degree angles and extend several meters into the interior of the block. Try doing that with a bronze chisel and see how far you get. What really blows your mind is that these blocks were designed to fit together like giant Lego pieces. Each one has protrusions that fit perfectly into corresponding grooves in other blocks. It's a three-dimensional assembly system so complex that modern engineers need CAD software to understand it completely. And here comes the part that nobody can explain. These stones weren't cut locally. Geological analyses show that many of them come from quarries located between 10 and 90 kilometers away, across mountains, without wheels, without pack animals capable of moving that weight, without cranes. How the hell did they move 100-ton blocks through mountainous terrain for 90 kilometers? Once they arrived at the site, they didn't just pile them up there any old way. They assembled them with precision that requires advanced engineering planning. Each block had to arrive in perfect condition because there was no margin for error. One blow, one crack, one poorly made cut, and the entire system would collapse. Traditional archaeologists insist that the people of Tiwanaku achieved this using primitive techniques: stone hammers to give basic shape, sand as an abrasive to polish, and lots of patience. But when modern stonemasons have tried to replicate even the simplest pieces of Puma Punku using these techniques, they failed miserably. In 2012, a team of documentarians brought expert stonemasons and engineers to Bolivia to try to recreate just one of the smaller blocks using tools that were supposedly available in 600 AD. After weeks of intensive work, they managed to produce something that vaguely resembled the general shape, but the surfaces were rough, the angles were off, and the precision was approximately 1,000 times worse than the originals. The same stonemasons admitted that to achieve the precision of Puma Punku, they would need CNC milling machines, precision lathes, and diamond tools. Technology that, officially, didn't exist 1,500 years ago. Then the desperate theories start appearing. Some researchers propose that the ancient Bolivians developed a way to soften stone using plant acids extracted from Amazonian plants. Others suggest they used high-frequency sonic vibration to weaken the molecular structure of rock and make easier cuts. These ideas sound like science fiction, but they reflect the desperation of academics to find some explanation that doesn't involve advanced technology. Because if you admit that the people of Tiwanaku had access to industrial precision tools, then you have to explain where those tools are, who manufactured them, and why there's no trace of that technology anywhere else on the continent. The third option, which the official scientific community doesn't even consider, is that Puma Punku wasn't built by the Tiwanaku civilization, that they simply found it there, like us, and used it for their own purposes. That it was built by someone else at some earlier time using technology we don't understand. The current state of the site supports this theory. Puma Punku doesn't look like something that deteriorated slowly over time. It looks like something that was destroyed violently and suddenly. The blocks are scattered as if a massive explosion had thrown them through the air. Some are overturned, others are partially buried, and many show evidence of having been subjected to extreme forces. An earthquake? Possible, but earthquakes don't throw 100-ton blocks hundreds of meters away. A war? The Tiwanaku didn't have weapons capable of causing this type of destruction. Some kind of natural catastrophe we don't understand? That's where things get really interesting. Because when you start studying other megalithic sites around the world, you find the same pattern. Impossibly precise constructions, made with techniques we can't replicate, destroyed by forces we can't explain. as if there had existed a global civilization with advanced technology that was erased from history by some catastrophic event. Puma Punku isn't just an archaeological site, it's a question carved in stone. A question that official science prefers not to answer because the answer would imply rewriting everything we think we know about the development of human civilization. The stones are still there, exact to the 10,000th of an inch, waiting for someone to have the courage to admit the obvious. We don't know who made them, we don't know how they made them, and we definitely don't know why they're destroyed. Chapter 3. Ollantay Tambo. The cuts that defy physics. Perfect 90-degree angles cut inside the joints between stone blocks. Not on the surface, where anyone could do it with patience and the right tools. Inside. In spaces where it's physically impossible to fit tools to work. It's as if someone had taken an invisible saw and cut the stone from the inside out, leaving internal corners so perfect they seem machine-made. But this is at Ollantay Tambo, in Peru, supposedly built by the Incas using stone hammers. Ollantay Tambo is in the Sacred Valley, about 90 kilometers from Cusco. It was a royal fortress and an Inca ceremonial center, but the part that really fries your brain is the Temple of the Sun, specifically the famous Wall of the Six Monoliths. 6 pink granite blocks, each weighing around 50 tons, cut and assembled with precision that makes modern engineers scratch their heads. The first thing you notice when you stand in front of this wall is that you can't fit even a razor blade between the stones. Literally. People have tried it for decades. The blocks fit so perfectly they seem like a single piece of rock. No mortar, no cement, nothing holding them together except the pure precision of the cut. But that's just the beginning. When archaeologists started studying the wall more closely, they found something that shouldn't exist. The famous internal right-angle cuts. These are perfect 90-degree angles carved into the internal corners where the blocks meet. We're not talking about approximate cuts that look good. We're talking about mathematical precision. The problem is that to make these cuts, you'd need to fit tools into spaces less than 2 centimeters wide, work at impossible angles, and somehow maintain perfect precision while doing it. With modern tools, it would be extremely difficult. With bronze chisels and stone hammers, it's simply impossible. Each block also has protrusions that fit into corresponding recesses in the neighboring block. These aren't simple T-shaped connections. They're complex 3-dimensional fittings, like giant puzzle pieces, where each curved surface of one block perfectly complements a concave surface of another. It's precision engineering taken to a level we don't even attempt in modern construction. And here comes the part that really has no explanation: seismic resistance. Peru is in one of the most seismically active zones on the planet. Earthquakes are a constant reality. During the last 500 years, the region has been hit by dozens of devastating earthquakes that have destroyed colonial churches, modern buildings, and practically everything built after the Incas. But the Wall of the Six Monoliths is still there, intact. Not only that, but the blocks move slightly during earthquakes and then return to their original position. It's as if the system had been designed specifically to absorb and dissipate seismic energy. Modern anti-seismic engineers study these structures to understand how this technology that supposedly shouldn't exist works. Things get even crazier when you consider where these stones came from. The pink granite isn't local. It comes from a quarry located on the other side of the valley, about 6 kilometers away. But not just 6 kilometers in a straight line across flat terrain. We're talking about a route that includes going down a steep mountain, crossing the Urubamba River, and then climbing up the other side to the construction site. The elevation difference between the quarry and the temple is approximately 400 meters. Imagine moving 50-ton blocks up a slope 400 meters high. Our most powerful cranes would have problems with that task, and once they got to the top, they didn't just place them there any old way. They assembled them with the precision of a Swiss watch. The Incas officially had no wheels, no pack animals capable of moving that weight, no cranes, and supposedly no metal tools harder than bronze. Yet somehow, they managed to transport and assemble these blocks with precision that defies the laws of physics. The surfaces of the blocks are so flat they reflect light like mirrors. When you put a metal ruler on them, there's no deviation. The corners are so perfect they seem machine-made. There are no chisel marks, no evidence of polishing work, no trace of the process used to achieve this level of perfection. Official archaeologists insist that the Incas achieved this precision using abrasion techniques, rubbing the stones with sand for months or years until achieving perfect surfaces. But modern experiments to test this theory have failed miserably. Sand can't create perfectly flat surfaces. It creates concave surfaces because it's impossible to maintain uniform pressure across the entire surface for prolonged periods. Furthermore, if they had really used abrasion techniques, there should be tons of stone detritus around the site, sand contaminated with granite dust, worn tools, evidence of the process. But there's nothing. It's as if the blocks had arrived at the site already finished, ready to assemble. Then alternative theories start appearing. Some researchers propose that the Incas developed some kind of chemical technology to soften stone. The idea is that they could have extracted acids from Amazonian plants that temporarily altered the molecular structure of granite, allowing them to mold it like clay before it hardened again. Others suggest sonic technology, the possibility that they had discovered specific frequencies that weakened atomic bonds in rock, allowing more precise cuts. These theories sound like science fiction, but they reflect researchers' desperation to find some explanation that doesn't involve admitting we don't understand how it was done. The third possibility is that the Incas didn't build Ollantaytambo, that they found these structures already there and simply incorporated them into their own architecture. This theory would explain why the construction techniques are so different from everything else we know about Inca engineering, and why there's no evidence of the construction process. If you look at aerial photos of Ollantaytambo, you can clearly see two different architectural styles. The structures in the lower part of the site are typically Inca. Smaller stones, recognizable construction techniques, characteristic decoration. But the structures in the upper part, including the Temple of the Sun, are completely different. More massive, more precise, more advanced. It's as if two completely different civilizations had worked on the same site at different times. The Incas built on and around structures that were already there, but never managed to replicate the original technology. The internal right-angle cuts are still there, defying anyone who thinks they understand Inca technology. They're a reminder carved in stone that there are aspects of human history we simply don't understand. And until someone can explain how these cuts were made using 15th century tools, Ollantaytambo will remain one of archaeology's most disturbing mysteries. Chapter 4. Mount Shoria, the Giants of Siberia. Granite blocks more than 40 meters high stacked like giant bricks in the middle of the Siberian wilderness. No tools around, no inscriptions, no ceramics, absolutely nothing indicating who put them there or when. Just enormous stones organized in geometric patterns that shouldn't exist naturally. Mount Shoria is in the deep forests of southern Siberia, in the Kemerovo region of Russia. It's so remote, there are no paved roads that reach there. No tourist trails, no official signage, no visitor centers. If you want to see these structures, you have to walk for several days through dense forest, using GPS coordinates and hoping not to get lost. And that remoteness is part of what makes all this so strange. We're talking about one of the most impressive megalithic sites on the planet, located in a place where practically nobody can see it. It makes no sense from any traditional perspective of human construction. Why build something so massive in such an inaccessible place? The first photographs of the site appeared online in the early 2010s, published by independent Russian explorers who had made the arduous journey to the location. The images were so impressive that many people assumed they were fake. Perfect rectangular blocks the size of apartment buildings, stacked with geometric precision, emerging from a forest that seemed completely virgin. But as more expedition teams managed to reach the site and document it from multiple angles, it became clear that these formations were real and completely impossible to explain using conventional theories. The individual blocks are massive beyond any normal human scale. Some measure more than 20 meters long, 6 meters wide, and weigh thousands of tons. They're cut with straight edges, perfect corners, and flat surfaces that defy any natural explanation. Granite doesn't naturally fracture in perfect rectangular shapes. It fractures in irregular shapes, following the lines of least resistance in the rock's crystal structure. But these blocks seem to have been cut with giant saws. The lines are too straight, the angles too precise, and the organization too deliberate to be the result of random geological processes. In some places, the blocks are clearly stacked on top of each other in patterns that suggest intentional construction. You have horizontal rows of perfectly aligned blocks, with vertical blocks placed on top following the same geometric pattern. What makes Mount Shoria especially puzzling is what isn't there. At any real archaeological site, no matter how old, you find evidence of human activity. Broken tools, ceramic fragments, animal bones from meals, fire ashes, something indicating that people were there working. At Mount Shoria, there's nothing. Explorers have combed the area for years and haven't found a single artifact connecting the structures to any known culture. There are no inscriptions, no symbols, no decoration. Just granite cut and stacked with impossible precision, surrounded by virgin forest. The total absence of archaeological context is almost stranger than the structures themselves. It's as if someone had dropped these blocks from the sky, completely formed, without leaving any trace of how they got there. Russian geologists who have studied the formations officially classify them as natural phenomena. They argue they're the result of vertical tectonic fracturing, selective erosion processes, and freeze-thaw cycles over millions of years. According to this theory, natural forces can create patterns that seem artificial, but are actually completely geological. The problem with this explanation is that it doesn't explain the geometric precision of the formations. Natural processes create organic, irregular, chaotic patterns. They don't create perfect straight lines extending for dozens of meters. They don't create exact 90-degree corners. And they definitely don't create organized piles of identical rectangular blocks. Furthermore, if these were natural geological phenomena, there should be similar formations in other parts of the world with similar geological conditions. But there aren't. Mount Shoria is unique, and that singularity makes the natural explanation even less convincing. The official Russian scientific community has shown surprisingly little interest in studying the site. There have been no formal archaeological expeditions, no systematic excavations, no serious attempts to date the formations or determine their origin. It's as if Russian academia had collectively decided to ignore one of the most extraordinary sites in their own country. This lack of official scientific interest has led some independent researchers to propose more radical theories. The most controversial is the giants hypothesis. The idea that these structures were built by massive humanoid beings that existed in the distant past. The theory is based on the pure scale of the constructions. The blocks are so large that only giant-sized beings could handle them like we handle normal bricks. References to giants appear in practically all world mythologies. The Nephilim in Hebrew tradition, the Jotuns in Norse mythology, the Titans in Greek mythology, the Fomwa in Celtic tradition. What if these weren't just stories? What if they were cultural memories of real encounters with a larger humanoid species that coexisted with Homo sapiens at some point in the past? The structures of Mount Shoria would be physical evidence of their existence, built on a scale that makes sense for beings 10 or 15 meters tall. This theory sounds like fantasy, but it explains aspects of the site that conventional theories can't address. It explains the massive scale, the precision of construction, and the absence of associated tools or technology. The giants would have had the physical strength to move the blocks manually, without need for machines or complex tools. It would also explain why there's no associated archaeological evidence. If the giants were a different species with a completely different culture, it's possible they didn't use tools, ceramics, or fire in the same way modern humans do. Their construction methods might have been purely physical, based on brute force instead of technology. Of course, this theory requires accepting that human evolutionary history is much more complex than we currently understand. It requires admitting that giant humanoid species might have existed that were erased from the geological record by some catastrophic event. But Mount Shoria is there, defying conventional explanations. The blocks continue stacked in their impossible patterns, surrounded by the silence of the Siberian forest. Without archaeologists studying them, without tourists visiting them, without official explanations contextualizing them, it's as if the site were waiting for official science to have the courage to admit it doesn't understand everything about the planet's past, waiting for someone to ask the right questions about who or what was capable of moving blocks of thousands of tons in the middle of prehistoric Siberia. Meanwhile, the stone giants continue standing guard over secrets that could rewrite human history, if anyone bothers to listen to what they have to say. Chapter 5: Bimini Road, the Lost Road Under the Sea. A perfectly aligned stone road under 6 meters of crystal-clear water, rectangular blocks of several tons each, organized in a smooth curve that extends for 800 meters across the sea floor. As if someone had built a highway and then the ocean had swallowed it. Bimini Road is about 80 kilometers off the coast of Florida, near Bimini Island in the Bahamas. It was discovered in 1968 by a team of divers led by J. Manson Valentine, a marine zoologist who was doing underwater research in the area. When the first images reached the surface, they caused an immediate stir in the archaeological community. It wasn't just the structure itself that caught attention. It was the date of discovery. Edgar Cayce, the famous American medium and psychic, had predicted in several readings during the 1930s and 1940s that evidence of Atlantis would be found near Bimini around 1968 or 1969. When Valentine made his discovery in September 1968, Cayce's followers saw this as prophetic confirmation of the seer's visions. But setting aside the mystical connections, the underwater structure presents real archaeological problems that go far beyond psychic predictions. The blocks that form the road measure between 2 and 4 meters in length, approximately 2 meters wide, and are cut in consistent geometric shapes. They're not natural rocks worn by currents. They're clearly worked blocks with defined edges and relatively flat surfaces. The formation isn't perfectly straight but follows a deliberate smooth curve, as if it had been designed to follow the natural contour of the sea floor or to serve some specific architectural purpose. From the air, it looks exactly like what its name suggests, a road or a base structure that was once on dry land. What makes Bimini Road particularly intriguing is the uniformity of the blocks and their organization. They're not scattered randomly as you'd expect from natural detritus. They're aligned in orderly rows, with consistent spaces between them, following a pattern that suggests deliberate planning. Some blocks even show evidence of having been stacked in multiple layers, as if they were the foundations of a larger structure. During the decades following the initial discovery, hundreds of divers, amateur archaeologists, and independent researchers have documented not only the main formation, but also additional structures in the area. Some report having found flat stone platforms that look like building bases. Others have documented blocks with strange grooves, marks that could be artificial, and formations suggesting that Bimini Road was part of a much larger complex. But here's where the controversy really explodes. The official scientific community, led by geologists from the United States Geological Survey, USGS, has consistently rejected the idea that Bimini Road is an artificial structure. Dr. Eugene Shin, one of the most respected marine geologists at the USGS, has argued for decades that the entire formation can be completely explained by natural geological processes. According to Shin, what we're seeing is marine limestone that formed thousands of years ago when sea level was lower. This type of rock tends to fracture along natural stress lines, creating straight cracks that eventually become rectangular blocks. Chemical dissolution processes, erosion by marine currents, and minor tectonic movements can cause these blocks to separate and settle in patterns that seem artificial, but are actually completely natural. Shin's theory has solid scientific backing. Marine limestone does fracture this way, and there are examples of similar geological formations in other parts of the world. But defenders of the artificial theory point out several problems with this explanation. First, the scale and consistency of the formation go beyond what natural processes typically produce. Second, the specific organization of blocks in ordered patterns is statistically improbable if it were purely random. Furthermore, some analyses have suggested that certain blocks show evidence of human work. corners too perfect, surfaces too flat, and alignments too precise to be natural. Although these analyses haven't been accepted by the mainstream scientific community, they continue to fuel debate about the structure's real origin. Chronology is another complicating factor. Isotopic analyses of the rocks suggest ages ranging from 2,000 to 3,500 years, which would place them in a known historical period. But defenders of the Atlantis connection argue that the structure could be much older, possibly 10,000 years or more, coinciding with the period when Plato placed Atlantis's destruction. The problem is that there are no definitive dating methods for marine limestone structures that can resolve this discrepancy. The uncertainty in dates leaves the door open to multiple interpretations, from a known historical construction to a vestige of a prehistoric civilization. The location of Bimini Road also adds a layer of intrigue to the mystery. It's situated within the boundaries of the infamous Bermuda Triangle, a region known for anomalous magnetic phenomena, unexplained disappearances of ships and planes, and reports of erratic behavior in navigation instruments. Although there's no scientific evidence that Bimini Road is connected to these phenomena, the geographical coincidence has fueled theories about ancient technology, energy fields, and connections to lost civilizations. Thousands of recreational divers have visited the site during the last 5 decades, documenting it with photographs, videos, and 3D models. This massive documentation has created a detailed visual archive of the structure, but has also led to conflicting interpretations. Each person who dives there sees something slightly different, and interpretations range from obviously natural to clearly artificial. The visual ambiguity of the structure is part of what makes it so fascinating. Depending on the angle of observation, lighting, and the observer's expectations, Bimini Road can seem like a natural geological formation or the remains of an ancient construction. This ambiguity has kept the debate alive for more than 50 years. For believers in Atlantis, Bimini Road represents tangible physical evidence of a lost civilization that once prospered in the area before being submerged by rising sea levels or some other cataclysm. For skeptical geologists, it's a perfect example of how humans tend to see artificial patterns in natural formations, especially when we want to believe in something more mysterious. But perhaps the real importance of Bimini Road isn't in definitively resolving whether it's natural or artificial. Perhaps it's in what it represents, the blurry frontier between the known and unknown, between established science and possibilities we don't yet understand. It's an underwater reminder that the world's oceans still guard secrets, and that our understanding of the human past remains incomplete. The structure is still there, under the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean, waiting for someone to develop definitive methods to determine its origin. Meanwhile, it continues inspiring expeditions, academic debates, and speculation about what other secrets might be hidden under the world's oceans. Each dive to Bimini Road is a journey into ambiguity, where the line between geology and archaeology blurs under 6 meters of salt water. And perhaps that ambiguity is exactly what makes it worth continuing to explore. Chapter 6: The Great Ziggurat of Ur, Portal to the Stars. Magnetized bricks in a 4,100-year-old construction. We're not talking about weak residual magnetism that ancient ceramic materials sometimes develop. We're talking about magnetization strong enough to be detected by modern instruments in a structure that supposedly was built using only primitive Bronze Age techniques. The Great Ziggurat of Ur rises in the desert of southern Iraq, near the modern city of Nasiriyah. It was built around 2100 BC by order of King Ur-Nammu of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nana. It is a massive stepped pyramid with a rectangular base of more than 60 meters long and an original height of approximately 30 meters, built entirely with sun-dried adobe bricks and fired bricks. At first glance, it seems like an impressive but understandable architectural project for its time. The Mesopotamians were experts in brick construction, they had a well-organized society, and ziggurats were fundamental to their religious worldview. But when you start examining the technical details and associated archaeological evidence, anomalies appear that don't fit with what we know about Sumerian technology. The first anomaly is the clay tablets found in the temple chambers adjacent to the ziggurat. These tablets contain astronomical calculations of a precision that shouldn't have been possible without advanced optical instruments. We're talking about precise tracking of planetary cycles, exact predictions of lunar and solar eclipses, and stellar maps that show constellations with a precision that European astronomers didn't achieve until the 17th century. The Sumerians supposedly didn't have telescopes, didn't have precise measuring instruments, and lived in an era where most of humanity had barely developed writing. However, their astronomical calculations are so exact that modern astronomers use them as references to reconstruct historical celestial events. How did they develop this knowledge? The official answer is patient observation over centuries, oral transmission of astronomical data, and an extraordinary cultural dedication to studying the night sky. But when you examine the mathematical complexity involved in predicting eclipses and mapping planetary movements, this explanation starts to sound insufficient. The second anomaly is in the construction of the ziggurat itself. Certain sections of the structure show reinforcement techniques that were not typical of the era. Some bricks are reinforced with materials that are not found naturally in the Mesopotamian region. Others show placement patterns that suggest knowledge of seismic engineering, despite the fact that Mesopotamia is not in a particularly seismically active zone. Even stranger, some of the bricks in the core of the structure show weak but detectable magnetic properties. Analyses have confirmed that this magnetization is not the result of exposure to modern magnetic fields or natural deterioration processes. It appears to be incorporated into the material itself, as if the bricks had been exposed to intense electromagnetic fields during their manufacture or installation. The third anomaly is the symbols carved in certain sections of the ziggurat's base. Many of these symbols are recognizably Sumerian, but others don't match any known writing system from Mesopotamia. Some even show surprising similarities to symbols found in completely unrelated cultures on different continents, suggesting cultural connections that shouldn't have existed in 2100 BC. These anomalies have led some researchers to propose alternative theories about the ziggurat's real purpose. The most controversial theory, popularized by writers like Zecharia Sitchin, suggests that the structure was not just a religious temple but a technological interface designed for communication with the Anunnaki, extraterrestrial beings who, according to Sumerian tablets, descended from the sky. According to this theory, the ziggurat's step design was not just symbolic but functional, acting as a kind of antenna or communication device. The magnetized materials would have served to amplify or direct electromagnetic signals. The precise astronomical alignments would have allowed communication with specific locations in the sky at specific times. The mainstream archaeological community rejects these ideas as unfounded speculation, arguing that the Sumerians were perfectly capable of achieving their astronomical and architectural advances using only human knowledge and dedicated observation. They point out that many ancient civilizations developed sophisticated astronomy without extraterrestrial help, and that the technical anomalies can be explained by lost or misunderstood techniques. But the ziggurat continues to pose uncomfortable questions. Electromagnetic analyses of the site have detected anomalous readings that are not present in similar Mesopotamian structures. Some researchers have reported interference in electronic equipment when working near certain sections of the ziggurat, although these reports have not been officially verified. The references to the Anunnaki in Sumerian texts are particularly intriguing because they describe these beings in terms that sound remarkably similar to modern descriptions of extraterrestrial encounters. The Anunnaki are described as coming from the sky in bright vehicles, possessing advanced technology, and having superior knowledge about astronomy, agriculture, and metallurgy. Do these descriptions represent literal encounters with extraterrestrial visitors, or are they religious metaphors for natural phenomena that the Sumerians couldn't explain scientifically? The texts are ambiguous, and different scholars interpret them in completely different ways. What is not ambiguous is that the ziggurat was designed with extraordinary astronomical precision. Its orientation is aligned with specific celestial events related to Nana's lunar cult. The stairs and platforms are positioned to create precise sightlines to certain celestial objects on specific dates of the Sumerian calendar. This astronomical precision goes beyond what would be needed for basic religious purposes. It's as if the structure had been designed by professional astronomers who understood celestial mechanics at a level that didn't become common in human civilization until thousands of years later. The calculations required for these alignments involve advanced trigonometry, understanding of Earth's axial precession, and detailed knowledge of complex planetary cycles. The Sumerians supposedly had just invented the wheel and were beginning to experiment with bronze metallurgy. Where did they get the mathematical and astronomical knowledge to create these precise alignments? The ziggurat also shows evidence of having been modified and expanded several times during its history, suggesting that different generations of builders continued refining its design. But each modification maintained the original astronomical alignments, indicating that the technical knowledge necessary for these alignments was preserved through centuries. Today, the Great Ziggurat of Ur stands as one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites in Mesopotamia. It has survived 4,100 years of war, erosion, and neglect, and continues to function as an astronomical observatory for modern archaeologists who study its alignments. But the fundamental questions remain unanswered. How did the Sumerians develop their extraordinary astronomical knowledge? Why do certain bricks show magnetic properties? What do the references to the Anunnaki in ancient texts really represent? The ziggurat guards its secrets as jealously as it did 4 millennia ago, a stairway of magnetized bricks that connects Earth to sky, waiting for someone to finally decipher its true purpose. Chapter 7. The Westford Knight, the Lost Templar. A medieval knight carved in stone in Massachusetts. Helmet, sword, shield, and all. The problem is that it was supposedly engraved in 1398, almost 100 years before Christopher Columbus set foot in America. If it's authentic, it completely rewrites the history of European discovery of the New World. The Westford Knight engraving is on a quiet hillside in the town of Westford, Massachusetts, approximately 40 kilometers northwest of Boston. It's not easy to see. In fact, most people who pass by don't notice anything special about the weathered granite rock, but when the light hits at the right angle, or when someone enhances the lines with chalk, the image of a complete human figure emerges. The figure measures approximately 1.5 meters in height and shows what appears to be a man in upright position, with legs slightly bent, holding what could be a shield in one hand and a sword in the other. The head is covered by what researchers interpret as a large medieval helmet, specifically the type of helmet that was common in Europe during the 13th and 14th centuries. The engraving was officially rediscovered in 1960 by Frank Glynn, a local amateur researcher, although area residents had been aware of strange marks on the rock for decades. Glynn contacted several experts in Native American rock art to examine the engraving, but all agreed that it didn't resemble any known petroglyph style from the region. Native rock art from New England typically consists of abstract symbols, stylized animal representations, and geometric patterns related to spiritual ceremonies or territorial markers. The Westford Knight is completely different. A detailed figurative representation of a human being with specific European armor and weapons. This stylistic difference is what led researchers like David Gurevich and Scott Walter to propose that the engraving could represent evidence of pre-Columbian European presence in North America. Specifically, they connect the engraving with Henry Sinclair, a 14th century Scottish nobleman who supposedly led a transatlantic expedition in 1398. The Henry Sinclair story is documented in several controversial historical texts, including the narratives of the Zeno brothers, two Venetian navigators who claim to have participated in North Atlantic expeditions in the late 14th century. According to these accounts, Sinclair organized a fleet that crossed the North Atlantic, possibly following Norse navigation routes, and established contact with unknown lands west of Greenland. The connection with the Knights Templar adds another layer of intrigue to the story. The Templars were officially dissolved by the Catholic Church in 1312, but many historians believe that surviving members of the order took refuge in Scotland under the protection of Robert Bruce. Henry Sinclair had family and political connections with these Templar refugees, and some researchers propose that his 1398 expedition was financed and organized by surviving Templars. The theory suggests that Sir James Gunn, a knight who participated in Sinclair's expedition, died during the exploration of the Massachusetts coast, and that his companions carved the engraving as a memorial. If this theory is correct, the Westford Knight would represent not only evidence of pre-Columbian European exploration, but also a direct connection with one of the most mysterious military orders in medieval history. Modern analyses of the engraving have produced mixed results. Independent researchers have used 3D laser scanning, high-resolution photography, and surface microstructure analysis to study the marks. Some of these analyses suggest that the grooves are too deep and consistent to be the result of natural erosion, and that they show patterns indicating intentional carving. Scott Wolter, a forensic geologist, has argued that certain characteristics of the engraving show evidence of deliberate human work. He points out that the lines have consistent depth, that they follow contours that don't correspond to natural erosion patterns, and that in some areas they show tool marks that suggest carving with metal instruments. Other researchers have claimed to identify additional details in the engraving, including what could be a Templar cross on the figure's shield and marks that could represent a belt with a medieval buckle. These details, if authentic, would provide additional evidence of medieval European origin. However, the mainstream archaeological community remains deeply skeptical. Critics argue that the engraving could be a collection of natural erosion marks that have been selectively interpreted to create the image of a knight. They point out that the phenomenon of pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive familiar patterns in random stimuli, could explain why some people see a human figure where others only see natural rockwear. Furthermore, no supporting archaeological evidence has been found in the surrounding area. A 14th century European expedition would have left other traces: metal fragments, European ceramics, tools, or at least evidence of temporary camps. The complete absence of medieval European artifacts in the region makes many archaeologists dismiss the pre-Columbian origin theory. Some critics also suggest that the engraving could have been created or modified in modern times, possibly during the 19th or 20th century, when interest in pre-Columbian exploration theories was at its peak. Enhancement of the engraving with chalk during decades of visitors could have gradually accentuated natural lines until creating the appearance of intentional carving. But the Westford Knight is not isolated. Researchers connect it with other anomalous sites in North America that suggest possible medieval European presence. The Newport Tower in Rhode Island is a circular stone structure that some argue resembles European Templar chapels. The Kensington runestone in Minnesota contains inscriptions in Norse runes that, if authentic, would indicate Scandinavian presence on the continent in 1362. The Dighton Rock in Massachusetts has inscriptions that some interpret as Portuguese or Norse writing. Taken together, these sites form a network of possible evidence of pre-Columbian European exploration extending from New England to the American Midwest. Of course, each of these sites is individually controversial, and the mainstream academic community rejects them as modern forgeries, misinterpreted natural phenomena, or examples of selective interpretation of ambiguous evidence. But for alternative researchers, they represent pieces of a larger puzzle that suggests the official history of European discovery of America is incomplete. The Westford Knight remains there, carved in New England granite, as ambiguous as ever. Depending on your perspective, it's fascinating evidence of secret medieval exploration, a perfect example of archaeological pareidolia, or possibly a well-executed historical forgery. But perhaps the real importance of the engraving is not in definitively resolving its authenticity. Perhaps it's in the questions it raises about what other secrets might be hidden in the North American landscape, waiting to be recognized by eyes that know how to look. While the controversy continues, the Silent Knight maintains his vigil on the Massachusetts hillside, stone guardian of secrets that could change our understanding of who first arrived in the New World and when. Final chapter: the pattern we don't want to see. The 7 mysteries we have explored are not simply historical puzzles. They are invitations to question, to investigate, to admit that perhaps we don't know as much about our past as we pretend. They are reminders carved in stone that human history is much more complex, much more mysterious, and much more fascinating than any academic textbook is willing to admit. The stones are still there, the mysteries persist, the questions accumulate. And somewhere, in some laboratory or future expedition, someone is going to find the piece that finally makes everything fit. Until then, all we can do is keep asking, keep investigating, and keep remembering that humanity's greatest discoveries have always come from questioning what everyone knew was true. The truth is out there, carved in stone, waiting for us to have the courage to look it directly in the eyes.